like the first fax machine was actually invented? Any guesses?
85?
1843. That's crazy.
That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So welcome to the fax machine meetup, everybody. I assume that you're all here to hear fun facts about fax machines. But if you're not, then we should maybe get onto the question corner stuff before people get totally confused as to why they're here. So let's kick it off. I will quickly share my screen before I burst into random other facts about other technologies. Okay. So everyone can see, I assume, what's going on? Screen stuff? Yep, you mean out there? Yep, fantastic. So yes, this is the Camunda Question Corner. This is number 7. We do it every, the last Thursday of every, Tuesday or Thursday? Luca? How often do you do this?
Every Thursday.
Yeah, last Thursday every month, I think we'll be doing this. And the goal of this is to take questions from the community, you lovely people, and answer them in a way that can be recorded for posterity and discussed and showed examples of, and generally just get involved a little more than usual. The people who are going to be here today are myself, I'm Niall, a developer advocate with Camunda, and my colleague Nele, who is a consultant with Camunda. And we will together be able to go through your questions and hopefully answer them. So the very big question of the zips is, how do these questions come about? Where are they? What's going on? Well, we're using a tool called Slido to do that. The questions have been open for about a week and a half, maybe. So people have been adding questions as they go along. But of course, we are still open for more questions and follow-up questions. So right now, either use your phone to scan this link and have the questions there on your phone, or you can follow the link that I assume Luca will magically drop into the chat. Wait, actually you don't need to, Luca. I think I actually have this more prepared than usual. Let's see if I can do that. Yeah, I will drop the link into the chat so you can load them up into your, there we go, fantastic. So you can load up on your screen. Meanwhile, we'll have them available here and you can talk through them. I will talk through them as we go along. So the way it works is when you actually go to Slido, you will see you can either answer a question, or sorry, ask a question or upvote a question, and we'll go through them as we get them and give them as much detail as we want. As new questions come in, we'll give them more precedence because you lovely people decided to come at this live. So you get preferential treatment. So feel free to add your questions there. If you have quick comments, you can use the Zoom chat, but the Zoom chat I won't be looking at too often for questions, so do put them there in Slido. And yeah, and also Zoom chat's not great for questions because they kind of get lost in the mess. So let's bring up the first question. Okay, so here are the questions that we have. The latest questions will show up there, and let's start from the very top. So first of all, Camunda, just for people who have no idea what it is a nice little engine that is written in Java that you can use to deploy processes and start them. What we also have is some web apps that are used to communicate with them. This first question is about a new web app plugin system that we're going to be releasing. The old one is fairly old, so it needs to be redone. It's asking here about whether the new version will be released in October. So the next version of Camunda 7.14 is released in October, and with that comes this new plugin system. But this said, will it be available next snapshot release? It'll actually be available at the next alpha release, which is in 2 weeks. So you'll be able to actually play around with the new plugin system in 2 weeks. We release alpha releases of the engine, I think, every month or so, or as necessary. There's a new release cadence I'll talk about, but basically that will actually have the new plugin system if you want to play around with it. Also, if you're interested, I'll be creating a tutorial video around actually how to actually create these plugins. So you should be able to follow that to build your own. Yeah, so that's how that works. Any follow-up questions, please feel free to ask. Next up, Nele, I'm going to find one for you. Do you want to take this guy here, maybe?
Yeah, it's what are the best practices around listeners? Okay, yeah, sure. So maybe that person or rep who asked that question already found out that we have our Camunda best practices, but actually we don't have a real best practices on listeners. And maybe I can share my screen because I like to show something or like to show visual to the people if they don't know what a task listener is. So I can show that or what listeners are. I take it away from you, Niall.
Yeah, all yours. I mean, promise to give it back.
I will eventually. Maybe not. Okay, you should see my modeler now, right? So there are two types of listeners that we have in Camunda, and listeners, we use them kind of to hide some logic from or in the process. So that means whenever we don't see that it is a part of the main business process, but we need some code, for example, to run, we use a listener. That's the basic idea of having listeners. And there are two types of listeners. And the first one is related to that guy, the user task. That means if we go now here to the property panel, you could see listeners. And here we have the task listener. And this task listener basically belongs to a user task and can be created by the event when this user task is, for example, created, when this user task is assigned, when it's completed, deleted, updated, timeout, and so on. So this really depends on the lifetime of this user task here. And for example, I could go here for create and then say whenever this thing is created, I want to notify or want to send a notification to the person, to the person or to the group that is assigned to this task, and they would get a notification. And that would be a typical use case because I don't want to have an extra service task in front of my process just to say that I'm sending here an email. Then there is another type of listeners actually, and that's the execution listeners. And execution listeners I can set on every BPMN symbol I would like to. So if I change this now to a gateway, I even could bring up an execution listener on my XOR gateway to say I want to create one, and then I can say I can create it at the start or at the end. And I could even do it on sequence flows. Maybe you see already to create a listener on a sequence flow can be very mean because it's very hidden in the model. So this would be something, well, I would say probably it's more anti-pattern to put an execution listener on a sequence flow or on a gateway. But maybe I have a service task, for example. This is a weird model. And maybe also here I have something where I want to have a listener, where I need some data preparation before I can enter the service task. And I don't want to have it as a main part of my business logic, but it is important that this code runs before. And then I also could go here for an execution listener and say before when this class starts, I want to run the execution listener, and then I run the service task. And you can see here the listener types you can set. They are all the things that you probably know from the service task. You have here the Java class, expressions, delegate expressions, and script. So here you can use, or you can connect them as you would connect a service task in your model. And yeah, interesting enough, the question about best practice for listeners is actually, it is, yeah, I don't know, what I see often is it depends on the people modeling the process, and it depends on the business itself, because sometimes people like to have everything explicitly in the model, so they don't want to hide anything. And other people, they don't like the idea to have everything explicitly in the model. So I think it's a hard question to give really a best practice guideline on those execution listeners, how to use them. Niall, do you have any experience with them, or do you like to add something?
Very briefly, anytime I've used them as scripts in order to set variables to trigger stuff, or to, like, for instance, it's very often the case where you might need to, say, for instance, tell an external system that a user task has suddenly become activated. This is quite common, and listeners are great for that, because then you can attach the same listener to basically all your user tasks, and then every time the process moves in that direction, almost like an event, you can just trigger it to tell the system that something's happened. So they're really, really good for triggering external systems, and also really quite good for doing really minor things like setting status variables. This seems really small, but let's imagine that you want a variable that changes the status as the process moves around. Using listeners with a script with like one line, super cool to do that. And then the history will always store each version of the variable. So then you'll be able to report on what times each and where that variable changed. So it's actually a very quick and very nice way of being able to define that. So I quite like listeners for that reason.
And maybe one more thing to add. I don't have it here because I have a new laptop, so I just got it today and I'm installing everything. So I just have the modeler. I don't have any plugins, but there is a really handy plugin system in the modeler that once you use listeners, it will have indicators in the model where you can see that you are actually using an execution listener. So it is maybe still hidden in the model, but if you are using the modeler to develop your model, you see at which points you set those execution listeners. I will, if Niall takes the next question, I will look for the plugin and post it in the chat, because I think it's really cool, and I also need to put it into my modeler.
Awesome. Okay. Yes, indeed. Actually, I have mine. It's a really good plugin. Maybe we'll talk about plugins later on. Okay. So, Nele, can you stop sharing? And I'm going to steal it from you. And let's find out what's next on the agenda. Alrighty. Okay. Aha! We have a question. Let's answer this one. I haven't read this question yet, but I'm going to answer it because is our key covert is here. So let's go. Can optimistic lock exception occur when multiple external task clients complete a task in parallel for a process instance or queued? Yes, absolutely. So let me quickly explain why optimistic locking exception tends to happen and how we can actually solve it here. So there's a few different ways it happens, but basically, there's a rule in the engine. In order to ensure the state is always robust, reliable, and the state is never corrupt, we have a rule that basically says that you cannot you cannot have a thread or more than one thread activate a single process instance at a time. The idea being that the state must be preserved in the sense that once one finishes manipulating the state, the next one can do that. But you can't have two manipulating the state at the same time, because then you'll have all sorts of weird stuff happening and race conditions and stuff. So to solve that problem, we have this little rule. Now, this means that we need the ability for jobs to be done, and with processes, because we have that parallel gateway and lots of ways of having multiple tokens in parallel at one time, they can only be activated at once. So what could happen sometimes with optimistic locking exceptions is that two different threads get a job they think they can do. The first one succeeds in doing that job and the second one fails because the first has already taken it. So this is a really common problem. So the question here is about multiple external task clients complete a task in parallel. So first of all, this can happen occasionally, but usually it's pretty okay if you do an asynchronous after the external task in question, because that way, once it completes, it automatically commits it to the database. So what might happen is a scenario where you send a bunch of threads into the engine, especially a multi-instance. So let's talk about, we have different external tasks, 4 different ones. All of them are trying to complete on the same instance because it's a multi-instance. Well, then you might have a scenario where that actually might fail. It's pretty easy to solve that problem because one thing about optimistic locking exceptions is that they have unlimited retries. So even if it fails on the engine side, which is what the asynchronous after the task would do, the engine will retry it until it succeeds, because an optimistic locking exception will always succeed eventually. So it's annoying because you'll have a whole bunch of stuff in your logs, but actually it'll probably solve itself. Optimistic locking exceptions are rare in that they're basically unavoidable in a scenario where you have a clustered engine and you have a lot of stuff happening and a lot of high throughput. The nice thing is that unless you get lots of them and they're actually slowing down your system, they're not much of a problem. So usually it's not that big a deal. Do you want to elaborate more on this actually, question asker?
Yeah, maybe. So in the case that I'm working on, I'm trying to execute multiple tasks. So it is a multi-task job.
Yeah.
And I have a client that will take up to 10 of these tasks. And
oh, I see.
Theoretically, they could finish at the same time. And I was just, this is kind of a theoretical question. I was wondering if the REST API or the Java API kind of queues the responses when a task is completed, or if they be executed in parallel and a optimistic locking exception could occur.
Yeah, so it will be queued sort of in a roundabout way if you do the async after thing, which would mean that as soon as you send the request, the engine just immediately takes that and commits it, and then any problems from then on the engine deals with. And so from the client perspective, nothing has gone wrong. The client perspective, they're able to do whatever, and any further issues the engine takes care of. You'll probably will, with high throughput, if lots of stuff is trying to access the same process instance at the same time, you're going to get these kind of exceptions. But there are kind of ways around it, like doing retries on the client side if you know it's a kind of error, or just asyncing after to make sure that as soon as something sends, there's a commit. Because there's actually an interesting thing around this, which is if you complete the external task, it actually won't commit by default until it reaches the next transaction boundary, which actually means the token might even move and do all sorts of stuff in the process, like run some scripts or whatever, or activate a timer, all before it returns to tell the client that it's actually completed the task. And that's when you could get problems. So by asyncing after the task, you've limited the amount of time where the thread is actually activated on complete to the lowest possible amount. So that would avoid it basically as much as you can.
Okay, I'll give that a try.
Cool, awesome. And it's a simple tick box. It's relative. If you aware how to do that, I can quickly show you.
Yeah. That would be
fantastic.
multi-instance, I think, after multi-instance async after, or just async after.
If you do multi-instance, do the multi-instance one.
Okay.
Cool.
Thanks.
Super duper. Let's give something.
Niall, let me ask you a question.
Bring it.
Because there is one question about preventing class not found error happening when running Camunda, right? So I was wondering if there is any kind of like plugin for the modelers to scan and see all the class names that are being referenced inside the file, so you can create some kind of like checklist. So when you boot up the engine, we can check for that and throw some warnings or something like that.
There is actually a plugin that someone built as part of a Maven build, but not part of the modeler. So let me quickly explain. Let's do this question now that Mauricio's brought it up. So here's basically what this means. This means that the process in runtime is moving from state to state and arrives at a service task, and for whatever reason, the Java class that's being pointed at is not found. Now, there's actually two reasons for this. Okay. There's always two reasons, and it actually depends on how you've implemented. Let me quickly stop sharing and bring the modeler up, because I'm going to take a leaf out of Nele's book and actually show instead of telling. So there's the modeler. Cool. Okay, so everyone should be able to see the modeler. So let's quickly show a service task. Great, let's zoom in. Okay, so here we have a service task, and the ways we can do this is Java class. So the most common problem that happens is either someone types something like this, com.org/Camunda, and they put in the wrong path of the file. Because an interesting thing is, as Mauricio pointed out, the modeler or the engine by default will not check this exists in design time. They'll only check it exists in runtime. So you would need to do the actual qualified name of the class in there. Now, to avoid that problem, because a big problem that people start to realize is that if I have my class and that's the qualified name, and then I do refactoring in my project, that completely breaks this, because this doesn't get picked up in the refactoring. So let's move on to how we solve that problem for the future, which is always try to use, if you can, if you're using Spring Beans or Beans in general, use delegate expressions. So these would basically say, okay, we're going to have an expression, my named bean, and this actually now doesn't rely on the class path. This actually would just say, whatever bean is called this, I will run that. And that's way easier. Then you can refactor stuff as long as you don't change the names, but you can move stuff around, and it's much easier and you won't find it that way. So, and I think there's I don't know where the plugin is. I think Steve Russ had built it, but it's basically an addition to Maven that goes through, parses your BPMN files and makes sure all your classes that you've registered to are actually available. It's super handy as part of a Maven build before you create the thing. I'll go look for that maybe and put on the forum somewhere, because that's a really cool addition. Now, since you brought this on yourself, Mauricio, there's also a second reason why this class not found thing happens, and it involves clustering. So in runtime, if you always get the class not found error, it means that there's something wrong here. If you sometimes get class not found, it means that you've got a weird cluster setup going on. Now, this usually means you have a single database with like 3 or 4 Camunda nodes, and they don't have to, they should all have the same classes, but sometimes what might happen was a process started on one node, gets sent to the database, picked up by another node that doesn't have the same classes, and then it throws the exception there. Luckily, you can fix this problem by telling the engine to be deployment aware. So this means that before it picks up a job to do, it'll actually check whether it can actually run that class and do that thing. So set that up in advance, and then you'll basically avoid the class not found errors. Mauricio, does that answer your question?
Makes sense. That's super good. Yes.
Fantastic. So I'll just stop talking now. Nele, have you got a question you'd like to take from these?
Sure, I saw another one about listeners that is kind of interesting.
Did we answer this one already?
Yeah, we did this, but there was another, this one.
Oh, this one here? Okay.
Yeah, so actually we could have done that in one run, but I just saw it now. So the question is, if I have, probably, I hope I understand it correct, I have a process and all my services are written in Node.js, and I also want to use listeners as external tasks. And I showed you the modeler before, and there was one, if you were looking at it carefully, I showed you that you can implement it how you would, for example, implement your service task, but there was one thing missing, and that was exactly the external task. So if you use the listeners, there's no way at the moment to configure them as external tasks. And we are aware of that, and it's not the first time we get this question, so probably there will be ongoing discussions if in the future it might be possible also to have them as external task listeners. But for the moment, if you want to do it now, you have to get a little bit creative and find a workaround. And there are actually more ways of doing it. And I found one very nice, actually, to use a BPMN pattern for this. Niall already said you could use a listener that will trigger a variable. And then in your model, if you use an event subprocess, you can start it with a conditional event that is listening for this variable. And then you would have it in your model. Should I quickly show that, or is it clear what I explained on an audio level?
Definitely show that. I love models.
Let me see where that should be the right desktop here. Yeah, so still on my beautiful model. So if I go, for example, this is my happy flow, or this is my model. Basically, the idea here, And maybe I want to have a listener before I start this service class here. What I could do is I could here configure actually an execution listener that will set a variable. And then in a BPMN pattern, what I can do is I can use an event subprocess that is actually listening or waiting for that variable to change as a condition. And then I would have here my external task listener. And this one again, I can modify then because I have it still in my model, but here I have again the possibility to implement it as an external task, which is not possible if I just have it here as a listener. And this could be handy if you want to do more complex things in your listeners actually. But I agree, I mean, we can argue now about this because if I use a lot of listeners, my model is getting slightly complex and I would have a lot of those event subprocesses in my model. And maybe it's not the nicest way, but I found it's a really, it's a workaround for the moment. I'm sure you can also get other workarounds for that situation. Can you think of something else, Niall?
I was actually just wondering if you click on that external task listener for a moment and you go into the implementation and choose external task, could you use an expression in the topic? So then what you could do is, this is really crazy, you could trigger the event and then create a variable that would then create the topic name of the listener you want to run, or of the external task you want to run. So that way you could actually find a way to dynamically call an external task of whatever name you want. I'm not sure if that would work. I've never tried it. It just came to my mind when you were talking about it. But
I've never tried it either, but let's try this. I think that sounds like an interesting idea.
Yeah, it sounds like the most unreadable model I can think of, where like trying to ask, why did that execution listen, why did that external task run? And then a random series of events occurred, which meant that it couldn't be stopped. Yeah, but it's actually a nice little pattern for that. I would like to reiterate that what Nele said initially is that adding external tasks as listeners is something we're definitely looking at. Especially now that we have Camunda BPM Run, a little Cambu, which is a new distribution. Another thing you can do to externalize them is use scripts. But that's meh. So we're looking into it as a feature and seeing what the consequences are. So it might be a good one in the future.
Yeah. Okay.
Super. Thanks, Nele. Let's see what else we got. Alrighty, so let's big tick on that one. I like this one. This is great. Strategy, very, very quick strategy guide. So this is our secret shame here in Camunda. One of our very few secret shames is that our front ends are both written in AngularJS, specifically Angular 1.4. So first of all, I'm sorry, and if anyone has already logged off this call, I don't entirely blame you. But we're working on removing this, and the first step is actually in the new release, where the plugin mechanism is now going to be written in React. We do plan over every release for the foreseeable future to remove all of the AngularJS stuff out of the web apps and replace it with React. So in maybe however long that takes, we'll eventually have our web apps written in React. So so I guess that probably answers the question about the strategy. Every single release, we're planning to try and remove more AngularJS, and the architecture is going to be a React-based architecture. And so that's how that will work. And and the first one is going to be 7.14, where we're going to have some new cockpit stuff. I would say as well, cockpit will almost certainly be prioritized above task list in terms of what gets changed. Okay, super duper. Let's keep going. Okay, Niall, is there anything you want to answer? Because I've realized I've talked a lot, so I should probably let you have something to say.
Sure. What about the one BPMN errors can be triggered by external systems? Should they be used? I mean, definitely. We showed you the external task worker, and if you imagine the external task worker has the same capability to trigger a BPMN error. That's the thing that is attached on a service task. Again, I can show my modeler. I like to have that. I take it away from you, Niall. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'll stop sharing.
I think that's okay.
Yep.
Somehow it helps me to have this. So if we imagine, this guy here is external, and this is actually the BPMN error event you can attach. And it doesn't matter if it's a Java class that you have here deployed with your process model, or if it's something you call externally. If you call something externally, it is completely possible also to send back this error call that will then trigger the BPMN error, and you can handle it in the model. And why would you do that? I think even with external tasks, it's important because you want to keep your business logic inside the model. And if there is something that can go wrong in that external task service, you want to be aware in your business logic of it. If it's something that you can handle, then maybe in your process. Yes. So I hope that is answered. Yeah. I would encourage you, of course, definitely to use those things.
Awesome, thanks, Nele. Let's see.
I give it back to you.
Action. Okay, what else we got? That was well answered. Let's tick that little box there. Great stuff. How can we increase the number of processes? Okay. How can I increase the number of processes I'm about to start? Okay. This is broad. And
it's not even a question, so it's just a statement.
Yeah. It doesn't have a question mark. Yeah, you're right. It's just I think it's probably about performance, about how to actually increase the number of processes you can start. There's a few different ways you can do that. So let's talk about the limits. So the first thing is, if I start a process, let's imagine I'm doing it via the REST API, just to be easy. So we send a thread in, and the process starts, and we get a return. That's quite quick. So the question is, how many instances can we start per second, generally? So the first thing we can do is, that is down to the number of threads that we have available on the place we deployed the engine, so either on Spring Boot or Wildfly or Tomcat or something. Now, the interesting things that the first thing we do is we can cluster it, which I advise you do. So that would be, you should always cluster the engine, have like at least 3 nodes, 1 database, have a load balancer in front of there, so you can then round robin. That just increases your thread pool. But actually, it may not even be the fastest way, because I think, as I mentioned earlier with the question about optimistic locking, one of the big issues with starting an instance is it doesn't start the instance and then immediately return. It starts the instance, will then move the token through the process until it finds a wait state, some time where it can commit. Okay, so that means it's possible that every time you start the process, it might take 30 seconds or something because it's running a whole bunch of other stuff. So to stop that problem, you can start more instances per second by adding an asynchronous after on the start event of your process. Because then as soon as the process starts, it immediately returns, and then the engine's own thread will pick up that job and continue it. And this really speeds up the amount you can start, because then there's only, the incoming message only starts the instance, and the rest is up to the engine to dole out. Yeah, anything else from there, Nele? Or hey, Mauricio, if you want to throw in your 2 cents, I'm also happy, about how to increase the number of processes I'm about to start.
Yeah, probably optimizing on the database connections as well, right? Because it's all about transactions. So it really depends on what latency do you have against the database, and yeah, and how good the transaction pool is configured, I guess, and the driver that you're using probably for connecting to the database, and the database vendor as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I didn't even mention database stuff. Nele, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, we have this whole best practice about performance, and something that could be related to the performance could be also the job executor. You might want to have a look into that one, because if it's set to the default, I think it takes 3 jobs, but maybe you would have more capacity. So you would like to increase the number if you go for production, if you have the capacity. But yeah, I think we can post maybe the link. I think it's quite kind of interesting to see all the performance measurements you can add to improve your performance actually here. But
yeah, very good point.
That's something that slipped my mind now.
Cool. So I will take that. Let's deal with this question. We have another minute or so to do a question. So the advantage of using React. So yeah, we went through all the different types of possible frameworks. The reason, I think, as I recall, the reason we settled on React was because we are also using React on Operate, as far as I'm aware, but also more importantly, we wanted to make sure that plugins we build can have some possibility to work. The plugin system we build has the ability to retroactively use older plugins. So with React, I'm fairly sure, and I'm not sure how exactly it works, but you can definitely embed Angular stuff inside React, as far as I'm aware, and you can't do that the other way around. And so I think that was one of the reasons why we went for React, because we wanted to be able to allow for other frameworks to be embedded if people wanted different plugin mechanisms. But I think also it's, it was also the fact that we were using React in other projects in Camunda itself, and we have but we actually took a long time to decide on React, I gotta say. It was a good amount of time of testing and checking out what the available stuff was. So it wasn't a conclusion we came to very quickly. There was a lot of testing that happened behind the scenes, and I think it was decided maybe about 6 or 7 months ago to use React, and that we planned ahead with that. So that's where we're currently at. If you've any specific thing that I'm missing, if there's any reason, because I'm interested, I know why we would use React in favor of the other two, because it's easy to plug stuff in. I'm not sure if that's not true or true of the other frameworks. So it could be other things as well. But I mean, generally, if you already have coders who can code in a framework, that tends to win out. And React seems as good as any. And plus, it's JavaScript, so maybe we'll have to just redo the entire framework again in like a year. So it's JavaScript is always temporary, it seems. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question. I think that's all we have time for, because we only have 5 minutes left. So let me just move this over here, because I got some more stuff to mention quickly. We did that, great. We did that as well. Let's try and skip that slide. There we go. Yes, upcoming events. You guys came to this event. You're wonderful. I love you all with all my heart. But obviously there are more events around. We've created a new calendar for them. We've only just started adding events to them. But if you go to the forum, which I will quickly show, oops, or not. Maybe I won't show it. Maybe it'll just break. Yes, it is. So if you go to the forum, you'll see that there's a, wait, I almost fixed it. Okay. Oh, wait, that's not another. Pants. There we go. Okay, we have a forum. Can people see it? Ah, beautiful. Finally made it. So right up here on the top right, you'll see upcoming events. And if you click on there, you'll see a calendar that shows the events that will be happening. So right now, you lovely people are at this question corner. And we also have some other events around the world, because we have lots of meetups, we have lots of other types of events. We have a process automation forum happening about banking and finance on the 11th, and also the Hamburg meetup is Hanover meetup. I don't want to get German cities mixed up, people get angry. Available there as well. So if you're interested in what events are happening at a glance, it's a good place to go, and also the events page in Camunda. But of course, the best place to go is always to sign up for the newsletter, which Luca will send a link around to. The newsletter will give you guys a good idea of any new features we have coming up, any new inside information about what the developers are up to, what they're doing, new plugins, and events that are coming up. It's actually quite a good little thing if you want to keep track of what kind of things are happening with Camunda. Luca, do you actually have that link, or shall I put it? Did you already do it? Oh, you did already. Of course, way ahead of the game. Bottom of the page inside the newsletter, yeah. Cool. So with that, I guess I can say thank you very, very much, everyone, for coming along. This will be up on YouTube at some stage in case, and I've gotten this complaint before, I've spoken too fast and you need to slow it down on the YouTube video. That's not a problem. It's a comment on virtually every video I've put out, and I'm very sorry. It's just the way I was born. And I'm slower than I used to be too. So this is actually as good as it gets. So yeah, thanks a lot for coming along. Thanks very much, Nele, for joining me, for helping me with the questions, Luca for organizing, Mauricio for the surprise appearance as well, of course, and everyone else, and everyone else for coming along. Hopefully see you guys next time. Last Thursday of every month we'll do this, and you can see that more accurately on the events calendar. So yeah, thanks a lot, and I'll see you guys later. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
See you later, guys.